you're not that person on the TikTok reel. So think about what am I trying to accomplish? What's most important to me? Then think about seeking out financial advice, real financial advice from a real financial professional.
From 9/11 to the great financial crisis to the coronavirus pandemic and everything in between, millennials have been a generation that has been shaken by different events that have happened throughout our lives. And not only that, but now Gen Zers are coming into the picture, wondering how they can set up and get ready for retirement. Joining me today is Penny Pennington, CEO of Edward Jones, to not only break down how we all can get ready for retirement together, but also whether or not we should be paying attention to momentum-led stocks and whether or not those TikToks and Instagram reels telling you that you could retire at age 25 really are to be believed. Penny, thank you for joining me for this episode of Coffee with Katherine, and I want to dig right into retirement because I know that that's on the forefront of many Americans' minds. If you're concerned about saving for retirement, what's your first step to take?
Well, the first step to take is to determine what's important to you. And what does retirement mean? You know, Katherine, some of your listeners and viewers, retirement or the traditional notion of retirement seems far off and really sort of intangible. Other of your viewers, it might be something much more relevant, something closer. So whenever we think about investing, we need to think about what are we trying to achieve? What are our goals? What's most important to us? And my goal is going to be different than your goal. My timing is going to be different than your timing. And so as we think about whatever those longer term goals are, we've got to think about the amount of money that we want to put aside, the amount of resources that we want to think about putting aside for the future. We want to think about our risk appetite, which determines how our investments are going to be allocated. And they need to be well diversified. They need to be really focused on quality. And then we need to think about, when is that goal? Is it something very far off? Or am I instead saving for a special purpose, for example? Or like so many people after the pandemic conditions that we've been living through, I need to think about making sure that I've got emergency dollars available quickly. I need more liquidity in my life in order to feel more resilient and safer in my financial life. So each one of us is different in terms of those goals, which means those three dimensions: how much I'm going to save, the way that I'm going to invest, my risk tolerance, and how long am I going to be doing it. The answer to those questions is going to be different for each of us.
So the oldest millennial is about 41 years old, give or take. And that's at least 20 to 30 years off from retirement. So you could argue that there's still time, but we all know that we should be really prepping at 20. And when you think about it, Penny, one of the things that gives me anxiety is going to the TikToks, to the Instagram reels, and seeing these people saying like, well, I've earned enough for my retirement twofold by 25. And I'm not there yet. And I doubt that a lot of people in my generation are there. So to reduce anxiety when you're thinking about retirement, is there something tangible that you can do? Is it speaking to a financial advisor? Is it just merely taking the steps to prepare?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I would do is take a deep breath. Then think about, as I said earlier, what am I trying to accomplish? YOLO, you only live once, and FOMO, the fear of missing out, is not a good investment strategy. You're not that person on the TikTok reel. So think about what am I trying to accomplish? What's most important to me? Then think about seeking out financial advice, real financial advice from a real financial professional. Now, there are a number of different ways to do that. Edward Jones has got 15,000 branches across North America with real trained financial advisors who are there to listen deeply to each person that we work with. That is the human being, human-centered financial advice. And Katherine, one of the things that I want to make sure your viewers and your listeners hear is you don't have to have a particular amount of money in order to meet with a financial advisor. Your finances could be very complex, or they could actually be pretty simple. And it's still worth speaking with a real live financial advisor about how to help you put together a plan to achieve whatever it is that's most important to you. It could be a very simple plan, and it probably will grow in complexity over time as life changes, as the needs of your family change, as your resources change. So working with a human financial advisor, the benefit of that is that on average, people wind up with 25% more assets when they work with a financial advisor. And they're also proven to be 10 percentage points higher in confidence than those who are not advised. What happens with confidence is that allows you to take that deep breath, to lessen your anxiety, to be more sure that you are actually going to be able to meet your goals in the future.
Well, what about unforeseen circumstances? I mean, we're living through, all of us, a life-altering pandemic right now. And when you think about the next 20, 30, 40 years, I mean, that's anxiety inducing, and not only something that's so out of control that we can't get in touch with, what's going to happen. Are we still going to be dealing with COVID in 40 years? How is that going to impact my retirement? And then you've got Social Security benefits running out potentially unless action is taken by 2034.
So what you're really dialing up is all the uncertainty, all the unknowns. I've been in financial services for 35 years, and I've got colleagues who've been in this business for decades longer than that. And what we know, Katherine, is that there's always something uncertain looming over the horizon. I was talking with some economists recently, and one of the things that they were talking about is this notion called belief scarring. So let me explain that for just a second. What belief scarring is the experience that we have of finding out something that we once thought was impossible is actually possible. If you'd asked us 5 years ago, what's the likelihood of a global pandemic? Some might have said that it was quite high, but many others of us who weren't really thinking about that would have said, well, the possibility of that is pretty low. Now we would look at that and say, well, the possibility that this might carry on is actually higher. And so what we find out is through experience is that improbable things do happen, and to prepare for that kind of uncertainty in our own lives. What we're seeing happen right now with investors is that they are much more likely to be thinking about an emergency fund, which has always been a very good thing to think about. Think about 2 to 6 months of your income in an emergency fund. Another thing that people are thinking about is protecting those they love. If something uncertain or improbable were to happen in my family, for example, and my income was lost, I need to make sure that my family is protected. And so we're seeing more people think about emergency savings, about protecting their plan and those they love in the event of something uncertain happening. But with a plan, the real point is that we build resilience and we reduce anxiety when we've thought about what we want to accomplish in the long term and how to put together a plan that can bear the buffeting of that kind of uncertainty and unusual things that are for sure going to crop up every few years.
Okay, so what would be the first 3 steps to building such a plan?
So the first thing that you need to do is reflect on what's most important to you and what you could foresee in the near term and longer term. Second thing is to get some advice. And I spoke about advice just a few moments ago. Advice has to do with the IQ of a financial professional, and that might be a financial professional that you might go see in your community. It also might be a financial professional that could be available to you through other means. I do not think that TikTok And the reel that's coming through on your phone right now is the sort of financial advice that I would be advising for my family. So advice is the second thing. And then the third thing is to work to put together a plan that contemplates more than one goal. Now, here's what I mean by that. Retirement goals are really important because to have a really successful retirement with a lot of options, it's going to take a few years to save and invest for that. But there are other goals that we're excited about in our lives. Saving for a special purpose, saving to put a child or a grandchild through college. The protection that I was talking about earlier. So what's important about that plan is ensuring that it covers multiple goals because you're a multidimensional person. You're interested in more than what's going to happen for you when you're 65 or older as you retire. So the third thing is ensuring that you're putting together a plan that contemplates multiple goals.
So it's interesting. One word that you keep using is FOMO, and I think that is directly related to the kind of investing action that we're starting to see crop up in places such as investing apps, Robinhood, Public.com, those kinds of apps and websites. So it makes me wonder, we could talk all day about whether or not people should be jumping into stocks such as GME or AMC or any of those momentum-led names. But I think the more interesting course of questioning that I want to put to you, Penny, is that when those people do enter into those kinds of names and we do see a market correction or any kind of market, negative market action overall, what's the first step they should take then? Should they have that emergency fund that kind of protects those investments from losses?
Mm-hmm. Katherine, if you don't mind, I want to sort of zoom out for just a second and then really answer your question. Give it a little bit longer term perspective. One of the things that we know is that in each generation, there's often a shock to the system. Talking about those unexpected things that happen. Shocks to the system that are unexpected sort of arrest our attention. And if that happens in some of our formative years as investors, that's the topic that we're talking about here, it really affects the rest of our lives. And it affects the decisions that we make about what we invest in, how we invest, whether we invest, and our risk tolerance for investing in the future. I'll talk about a recent example of this. The great financial crisis of 2008, 2009 really shifted a generation of investors' sense of confidence in the financial marketplace and getting a mortgage and buying a home and things like that. And that is going to affect them for the rest of their lives. We know that this happens. And so one of the things, frankly, that I'm concerned about is as new investors enter into the markets in ways that are more focused on the very short term and that experience rather than the longer term, I'm afraid that we're getting that mixed up, right? That we're taking a look at a very short-term momentum-driven investment and thinking that what has happened with that is what's going to happen with all of our investment and financial decisions, even as we apply a longer-term context to those. So I really want us to be very thoughtful about what we're doing as we're thinking about fear of missing out or you only live once as an investment strategy, because it's not. It is not one, and this is proven time and time again, it's not one that is enduring in order to help investors meet their goals for the long term.
Well, what you said is really interesting, Penny, because anecdotally, I mean, I'm a millennial. I speak to millennials, obviously, but when you look at the millennial generation, they've not only gone through 9/11 and the different economic impacts that had, then they did go through the great financial crisis. And maybe some of us, like for me at the time I was a teenager, I was witnessing what it was doing to my parents. And then you have like the coronavirus pandemic. It's really interesting to see how these three events have impacted and changed the way that millennials are approaching the markets. And I'm wondering if you think that that's kind of where the FOMO environment, the YOLO environment are coming from.
It could be. One of the things that financial advisors are a little bit of is psychologists as well, but we're not trained to be that. But what we learn from experience and working with generations of families is this enduring effect of things that do affect us when we're younger and how that plays out over our lifetimes. One of the things that what you just said made me think about is a little bit of research that we've been doing on different generations. And one of the things that we have discovered with the millennial generation, millennial and Gen Z, are most likely of any generation, this may surprise people, most likely of any generation to have lent money to family members during the pandemic. And that means lending money to their parents as well as to their children, right? We've got a wide array of ages in those two generations. So those two generations are more likely to have lent money. The generosity, the spirit of caring, the fact that millennials are working and perhaps have been in a position to continue working with the aid of technology and hybrid work arrangements. I found that very, very interesting. The other thing that we found is that the millennial generation is the generation most likely to say that they have increased their retirement savings as a result of enduring the pandemic. And so what you're describing of sort of having lived through three pretty major improbabilities during their lifetimes are looking at the future and saying, I probably need to take care of this. It's kind of up to me. I need to put a plan in place, and I still got plenty of time to put a plan in place that gives me more options in my life. I think that research about what's happening with millennials really amplifies what you just shared about the experience that you've had in your lifetime.
What's also interesting when you look at investing apps nowadays, Penny, is the fact that a lot of them have a social media element. And whether that's, it's either shared on social media or you can actually interact with people via the app. I'm wondering if you think that not to get too psychological, of course, but I'm wondering if you think that that's impacting how people invest.
Sure, absolutely it is. We know that peer-to-peer information sharing and referrals about all kinds of things are really powerful influencers. I'm going to sound so old and so old-fashioned in what I'm about to share, but my point is just to say that it's always been this way. We're influenced by people who are around us, who we respect, and who we have confidence in. When I was a financial advisor, people would say to me, well, my brother-in-law said that this was a really good thing to invest in. Well, I don't know if their brother-in-law was a financial professional. Most times not. But this has always been the case, being influenced by those we're close to, those that we respect and who are around us. There's nothing wrong with that. And at the same time, taking advice from folks who understand what we're trying to accomplish, who have the background and the experience and the training in what it is we're trying to plan for, is also a really important part of building a plan, of putting in place strategies that are tried and true, that have served to build enduring wealth for families and generations. Now, by this, I mean strategies. I don't mean in particular types of investments, because there is a great deal of innovation around in types of investments and the way that investments are built. But in terms of buying for quality, allocating them appropriately, diversifying well, and then changing that mix over time as it relates to your risk tolerance and what you're trying to accomplish continues to be, always has been, a tried and true way of building wealth and optionality in your life over time.
So Penny, there's this interesting, I want to break it down for our viewers because they probably don't know about it, but one of the things that made me really excited to be able to sit down and talk to you today is this notion of surviving and thriving in your career. Now, a lot of us, and maybe the pandemic has helped people realize that sometimes you're surviving in a career, you're just going day to day, but other times you're thriving, you're trying to build your career, you're really trying to make this into a lifetime achievement for yourself. So I want to start there because if someone is surviving, if they're just working day to day instead of really building the building blocks for where they plan to be in 20 or so years, what's your piece of advice for them? Should they really consider leaving their job or changing a career?
I've got three pieces of advice, Katherine, that I would share. And it's three pieces of advice that I've learned over the last 35 years in my career and have really been dialed up and affirmed for me in the last 18 months. The first piece of advice is get really in touch with what you're passionate about and what you believe your purpose in life is. And I know that sounds philosophical, but so many of us have had the opportunity in the last 18 months to really think about what's important to us, what's meaningful, what's worth spending 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day doing. Get in touch with your purpose and your passion and get really passionate about that. Second piece of advice is look for the ways that you are qualified rather than looking for the ways that disqualify you from that opportunity. That's the second piece of advice. Third piece of advice is never say no to something that terrifies you. One of the ways I find my own experience has taught me that when I get sort of stuck, it's often because I'm doing the same thing over and over again in the same way. And you do get stuck. And sometimes you get a little bored and wonder, what is this all about? If instead we say yes to opportunities that really stretch us, really grow us, and that make us uncomfortable. That really is the key. The thing that you go to work that day and say, my gosh, this is really going to push me. That's exactly the point. Say yes to those things that make you uncomfortable, that stretch and grow you. To me, that's thriving.
So your second piece of advice kind of hit on something that has always bothered me about women. And I say that because women, when they're applying for a job, tend to go for 90 to 100% of qualifications, whereas men, for the most part, tend to go for about 60% of qualifications when looking at job posting. How can we build women's confidence in the workplace? How can we get them to that 60% mark instead of the 90 to 100% mark?
Katherine, that research that you're quoting, I've read some of the same research, and on one hand it's disturbing. On the other hand, I think, I've done some of that before, right? So your question of how do we break out of that? Well, actually, I think that the last 18 months has helped us break out of that. And here's what I mean by that. The world is changing very, very quickly. Where in the past, and certainly years in the past, you could say, well, I have this list of qualifications, and those qualifications, that technical expertise, they qualify me for something for years, in that things don't change quite as quickly. Well, you hear as I describe that is not the world that we live in today. And I don't think it's going to be the world of the future. Our learning ability becomes key then, because as learners, we can learn new technical qualifications, new bodies of expertise. Now, there are some bodies of expertise that you grow in your craft year after year after year. That's true in the financial services industry. And that's one of the greatest things about the industry. So you are going to need to grow in your expertise, your technical qualifications. But one of the things, or sort of a body of skill that is even as important, are your skills and competencies around learning, around team building, around communication, around influencing, strategy, visioning a better future, and setting in place a plan to achieve those. Those skills and attributes actually sit alongside technical qualifications, and those skills and attributes are the ones that enable us to change and adapt rapidly, to grow, to innovate, and to create new value. And so as a leader, when I look for great talent, sure, I'm looking for expertise and experience, but I'm looking for someone who can lead and adapt in times of great uncertainty and change. And I would ask your listeners and your viewers to really focus your skills there. And women are terrific at that.
Penny, I'm going to end it there because that was such a strong note. So I really, really appreciate you joining us for Coffee with Katherine today.
It's a pleasure, Katherine. Take good care of yourself.
You too.